Welcome back to the Mountain Takes. I'm Isaac. Every climber on a major mountain makes choices that will decide whether they live or die. Today we're examining climbers who made the wrong choices, who had guides trying everything to keep them alive, who had warnings screaming at them from every direction, who ignored it all anyway, and the mountains that made them understand the consequences of that refusal. Sit tight. It was May 8, 2015, at Camp 3 on Mount Annapurna at 7,500 meters. Catherine Wells, 41, a British investment banker from London, was preparing for her summit push. She had summited Kilimanjaro, Elbrus, Aconcagua, and Denali. She had told her bank colleagues that she would summit Annapurna and be back in London by May 20 for a major deal closing. Her guide was Mingma Sherpa, 31, with 14 years of high-altitude experience and 8 Annapurna summits. Catherine believed that summiting Annapurna would make her story complete. Mingma understood that Annapurna didn't care about stories or schedules. Catherine had arrived at base camp on April 20, already focused on summit date. She had arranged her work schedule around a specific summit window. She had told investors and colleagues exact dates. She had made commitments that locked her into a timeline. This commitment was now driving her decisions at altitude, pushing her to summit regardless of conditions. Mingma had recognized this pattern before. He had watched other climbers die because of it. By Camp 2, Catherine was pushing aggressively through acclimatization. She wanted to skip a rest day to stay ahead of her timeline. Her oxygen saturation at rest was 66%, concerning but not critical. Mingma had recommended slowing down. Catherine had said her body was adapted and that she would summit on schedule. By Camp 3 on May 8, the weather forecast showed a brief window opening that night. Catherine wanted to push for the summit immediately. Mingma recommended waiting one more day for better conditions. Catherine said she didn't have time to wait. She said her deal was closing. Mingma said mountains didn't care about investment deals. They left Camp 3 at 7 p.m. on May 8th. Catherine was moving aggressively. Her breathing was labored. By 11 p.m., they were at approximately 7,800 meters. The weather was beginning to change. Wind was increasing. Mingma suggested slowing the pace. Catherine said they were making good time and needed to keep moving. She said her summit window was closing and she wasn't going to waste it. Do you understand what Mingma was watching? A climber whose commitment to a deadline had become stronger than her commitment to staying alive. By 2 a.m. on May 9th, they were at 8,000 meters. Catherine's movements were becoming uncoordinated. Her speech was slurring slightly. She was experiencing confusion and disorientation. Mingma recognized the signs: high-altitude cerebral edema, brain swelling from oxygen deprivation. He told Catherine they needed to descend immediately. Catherine said they were close to summit and she wasn't turning back. She said she had commitments in London. Mingma said that being dead in London would not help her investment deal. At 4:30 a.m. on May 9th, Catherine reached approximately 8,050 meters. The summit was visible through the clouds. She could see it. She believed she would summit within 1 hour. Mingma told her that conditions were deteriorating rapidly and they needed to descend now. Catherine refused. Mingma made a decision. He told Catherine that he was descending at 5 a.m. with or without her. He told her he would wait at Camp 2 for 6 hours. If she didn't return, he would not attempt a rescue. Mingma began descending at 5:15 a.m. on May 9th. Catherine continued ascending. At approximately 6:45 a.m., Catherine reached the Annapurna summit at 8,091 meters. She spent approximately 3 minutes taking photos and filming video for her colleagues in London. Then she began her descent. But the weather had completely deteriorated. The storm Mingma had predicted had arrived early. Visibility was nearly zero. Catherine was descending through sections she couldn't see. She was navigating by memory and by attempting to locate fixed ropes. At approximately 8:30 a.m., on a steep snow face, the snowpack beneath her shifted. A slab avalanche broke free. Catherine was caught directly in the slide. She was swept approximately 150 meters downslope before the avalanche stopped. The impact injuries were severe. She was unconscious. She remained unconscious as her core temperature dropped. She died from hypothermia within 40 minutes. Mingma reached Camp 2 at 10 a.m. on May 9th. Catherine had not returned. Mingma waited the promised 6 hours. Catherine never appeared. A rescue search was organized. Catherine's body was found 2 days later in the avalanche debris. Mingma survived and descended to base camp. He had done everything possible to keep her alive. Catherine had chosen her investment deal over her survival. It was May 14, 2018, at Camp 4 on Mount Everest at 26,000 feet. Jennifer Blake, 39, an American tech entrepreneur from Silicon Valley, was preparing for her summit push. She had summited Denali, Kilimanjaro, Aconcagua, and Elbrus. She had announced to her company that she would summit Everest and return for an investor presentation on May 25. Her guide was Dorje Sherpa, 34, with 12 years of high-altitude experience and 7 Everest summits. Jennifer believed that her success in business had prepared her for mountains. Dorje understood that mountains operated on completely different rules than business. Jennifer had arrived at base camp on April 15th, already focused on timeline. She had scheduled media interviews for late May. She had promised her board an Everest summit announcement. She had made commitments that locked her into a date. Dorje recognized that these external commitments were now more important to Jennifer than her survival. He had seen this before. It never ended well. By Camp 2, Jennifer was pushing aggressively through acclimatization. She wanted to move faster than the standard schedule. She wanted to summit on May 16th or 17th to guarantee she would be back in San Francisco by May 25th. Her oxygen saturation at rest was 64%, dangerously low. Dorje had recommended slowing down and waiting for better acclimatization. Jennifer had said her body was strong and that she would adapt quickly. By Camp 3, Jennifer's condition had worsened slightly, but she was still moving aggressively. By Camp 4 on May 14th, the weather forecast showed a brief window opening that night. Jennifer wanted to leave immediately for the summit push. Dorje recommended waiting another day for better conditions and for her body to acclimate further. Jennifer said she didn't have time to wait. She said her investor meeting was locked in. She said she needed to summit tonight, or her timeline would collapse. Dorje said that if she continued, she would likely die. Jennifer said she hadn't come this far to turn back. They left Camp 4 at 11:30 p.m. on May 14th. Jennifer was moving aggressively upward. Her breathing was heavy. By 2 a.m. on May 15th, they were at approximately 27,300 meters. The weather was beginning to change. Dorje suggested slowing the pace. Jennifer said they were making good time, and she wasn't going to stop. She said her summit window was closing, and she wasn't going to miss it. Dorje said that at 27,000 meters, windows don't matter, survival matters. Jennifer kept climbing. By 4 a.m. on May 15th, they were at 27,600 meters. Jennifer's movements were labored and uncoordinated. Her speech was confused. Dorje recognized high-altitude cerebral edema. Her brain was swelling from oxygen deprivation. He told Jennifer they needed to descend immediately. Jennifer said the summit was 1,200 meters above them and she wasn't turning back. She said she had promised her investors. Dorje said that dead entrepreneurs couldn't close funding rounds. Do you see the pattern? A guide warning, a climber refusing, a mountain waiting for payment. Dorje made a decision at 4:30 a.m. He told Jennifer that he was descending now. He told her he would wait at Camp 3 for 8 hours. If she didn't return, he would assume she was dead and would not attempt a rescue. Dorje began descending at 4:45 a.m. on May 15th. Jennifer continued ascending. At approximately 7 a.m., Jennifer reached the Everest summit at 29,032 meters. She spent approximately 5 minutes taking photos and filming video for her board presentation. Then she began her descent. But the weather had completely deteriorated. The storm Dorje had predicted had arrived early. Visibility was nearly zero. Wind was gusting above 60 kilometers per hour. Jennifer was descending through sections she couldn't see. At approximately 8:30 a.m., while crossing the southeast ridge, the wind pushed her off balance. She fell approximately 25 meters down a steep snow slope into a hidden crevasse. The fall caused massive trauma. She was unconscious. She remained unconscious as hypothermia set in. She died from a combination of injuries and cold within 30 minutes. Dorje reached Camp 3 at 12:15 p.m. on May 15th. Jennifer had not returned. Dorje waited the promised 8 hours. Jennifer never appeared. A rescue search was organized, but the storm prevented any rescue attempts. Jennifer's body was found 4 days later in the crevasse where she had fallen. Dorje survived and descended to base camp. He had done everything possible to keep her alive. Jennifer had chosen her investor meeting over her survival. The mountains didn't care about their commitments. Mountains only care about altitude and time. The guides survived. The women died. And both guides carry the weight of being right about everything except the one thing that mattered, convincing someone to choose life over a summit. It was April 9th, 2019, Everest Base Camp, 17,600 feet. Everest kills in ways that have nothing to do with fitness. Above 26,000 feet lies the death zone, where the air holds barely a third of the oxygen found at sea level, where the body begins consuming itself just to keep the brain functioning. More than 300 people have died on this mountain since records began, and a disproportionate number of them died not from lack of skill, but from a decision made somewhere between Camp 2 and Camp 4, when judgment was already the first thing the altitude took. Dana Whitfield was 44 years old, a management consultant from Charlotte, North Carolina, who had spent 19 years telling companies how to restructure themselves around efficiency. She had summited Aconcagua and Denali in the 3 years prior, and she carried both climbs like credentials, the way she carried her firm's name on a business card. Her Instagram bio read, "Peak performance, on mountains and in the boardroom." She had trained for 14 months for Everest, a nutritionist, an altitude tent in her spare bedroom, a climbing coach twice a week. Nothing prepared her for this. What Dana had never done was defer. In 19 years of consulting, she had built a career on walking into rooms where she knew less than anyone else in them, and leaving with everyone doing what she said. She assumed the mountain worked the same way. That authority was a posture you took, not something the terrain itself decided to grant or withhold. Her guide was Pemba Sherpa, 38, with 11 Everest summits behind him and 15 years guiding on the mountain. He was known at base camp for being quiet, meticulous, and almost unnervingly calm, the kind of guide other guides sent difficult clients to. He had 2 daughters in Kathmandu, and this season's contract was paying for their school fees 3 years running. He'd told his wife before he left that this would be his last big season. He wanted to be around for saving one more decision from becoming a mistake, and then be done. At base camp, the first friction surfaced during rotation planning. Pemba recommended an extra day at Camp 2 for acclimatization, standard practice for a first-time 8,000-meter climber. Dana said her Denali summit meant she didn't need training wheels. Pemba explained, gently, that Denali and Everest stressed the body in different ways, that the death zone above 8,000 meters had nothing comparable on Denali. Dana smiled and said she appreciated his caution, but she'd made her decision. Pemba noted it and let it go. The narrator would tell you now, this was the first quiet withdrawal, though nobody at camp could have named it yet. By Camp 2, at 21,300 feet, the pattern had a shape. Dana had started second-guessing Pemba's calls on pace, insisting they were moving too slowly through the western Qum, a valley climbers call the Valley of Silence, for the way sound seems to vanish into the surrounding walls of ice, and for how still the air goes on windless days. Pemba flagged her SpO2 reading at 81%, low for the altitude, not dangerous yet, but a signal. Dana waved off the pulse oximeter. "I feel fine," she said. Pemba wrote the number down anyway. At Camp 3, 23,600 feet, on the Lhotse face, an 1,800-foot wall of blue glacial ice, so steep that climbers fix ropes the entire way up it, because a single slip here has historically been fatal. Dana told Pemba she wanted to skip the second rotation back down to Camp 2 that most climbers use to acclimatize before summit push. Pemba explained the physiology as simply as he could. The body needs to touch altitude, retreat, and rebuild red blood cells before going higher, or the summit push becomes a race against a body that hasn't caught up. Dana told him she'd read the same articles he had, and that on Denali, she'd skipped a rotation and been fine. Pemba said Denali tops out at just over 20,000 feet. Dana said she'd made her decision. The narrator flags it here plainly. She was arguing physiology with a man who had 11 summits, based on a mountain half this one's height. The institutional complicity arrived at Camp 2, 3 days before the summit push. Dana radioed the expedition company's base camp manager directly, bypassing Pemba, to request a pace change and a different oxygen flow rate than Pemba had set. The base camp manager, aware Dana's firm had paid a premium rate and had already left a 5-star review of the company mid-expedition, a rare, valuable thing for future bookings, approved her request without consulting Pemba. Pemba found out only when Dana told him herself, almost cheerfully. He said nothing that night, but the following morning he asked the base camp manager, quietly and once, to route all future changes through him first. The manager said he would. He didn't. The summit push began the night of May 22nd, from the South Col at 26,000 feet, in temperatures near -30 degrees Fahrenheit, with a route that funnels climbers through the balcony, the South Summit, the Hillary Step, and then a final exposed ridge to the top, each section requiring hours of fixed rope traffic in single file, often in the dark, often in a queue. Above the South Col there is no real rescue. Above 26,000 feet, helicopters cannot safely operate, and a climber in trouble is, for practical purposes, dependent entirely on the people physically standing next to them. At the balcony, 27,600 feet, Dana's oxygen flow rate, set by her own request, not Pemba's, was running lean, calibrated for a longer summit day than her actual pace was achieving. Pemba noticed her gait had slowed, and her speech had thinned to short phrases. He suggested increasing her flow rate and turning back if it didn't improve within the hour. Dana told him, in a voice two other climbers on the rope behind her would later describe to investigators as flat but certain, that she hadn't spent 14 months training to turn around 800 feet from the top. Pemba said the mountain would still be there next year. Dana said she wouldn't be back next year, and he was welcome to descend alone if he'd lost his nerve. This was the point of no return, and it did not look dramatic. There was no shouting on that ridge. Dana simply unclipped her second carabiner from the fixed line where Pemba had asked her to double protect through an exposed section, looked at him, and clipped past him instead, taking the lead position on the rope for the first time all summit night. She said, "I don't need a babysitter above 8,000 meters. She said it once, and then, 20 minutes later, almost identically again, as if convincing herself. Pemba followed her, but no longer led. Near the south summit, 28,700 feet, with dawn breaking pink over the Kangshung face, Dana told Pemba she was releasing him from the summit push, that she'd radioed down that he'd been let go for excessive caution, and that she'd finish the final 500 feet with the queue of climbers ahead of her instead. Pemba radioed base camp immediately to report it. The manager told him company policy required him to stay with the client regardless of her instructions. Dana, overhearing the radio call on the shared channel, unclipped fully from Pemba's rope team and moved forward into the traffic line alone, telling two Indian climbers ahead of her that her guide had been reassigned. Sunita Rao, 34, a climber from Mumbai 2 positions ahead of Dana in the queue, would later tell investigators that Dana seemed lucid enough to speak in full sentences at that point, which was itself part of what made no one intervene. She didn't look confused, she looked determined. A second witness, Expedition Dr. Mark Feldman, stationed at the South Col, confirmed by radio log that Dana's oxygen mask readout, relayed by a nearby climber's radio, showed her tank pressure dropping faster than her flow rate setting should have allowed, suggesting either a regulator fault or a rate she'd altered again herself without telling anyone. At 8:40 a.m., near the base of the Hillary Step, at roughly 28,940 feet, Dana stopped moving in the queue. Climbers behind her assumed she was resting, as people often do in the traffic line at that altitude. It was 11 minutes before anyone realized she hadn't moved at all. Pemba, descending from where he'd last seen her, reached her position at 9:52 a.m. Her SpO2, when he finally got a reading, showed 58%. Her lips had gone the dull blue-gray of cyanosis. She was unresponsive to voice and to a sternal rub. Pemba administered supplemental oxygen at maximum flow and radioed for the closest available climbers to assist a carry-down, but above 28,000 feet a carry-down for an unresponsive adult is, in practical terms, nearly impossible. There is no evacuation above the death zone that doesn't risk the lives of everyone attempting it. 2 Sherpas from another team arrived to help within 20 minutes. Dana was pronounced dead at 11:15 a.m., later listed as high-altitude cerebral edema compounded by hypoxia, consistent with an oxygen flow rate insufficient for her actual exertion and altitude. They left a small trekking pole marker near where she was found, a quiet, unofficial custom on a mountain where full recovery is rarely possible. Pemba carried her ice axe down himself and gave it to her sister at base camp 8 days later. He didn't say much when he handed it over. He didn't need to. Dana had spent 19 years being right about rooms full of people who didn't know as much as she did. Everest was the first room that didn't care. It was May 10, 2014, at Camp 2 on Mount Annapurna at 21,000 feet. Robert and Sarah Hartman, both 38, were an American married couple from Denver. They had told their expedition operator that they had summited Kilimanjaro, Denali, and Aconcagua. They had submitted climbing resumes with photos and certificates. Their guide was Pemba Sherpa, 36, with 16 years of high-altitude experience and 9 Annapurna summits. Pemba had guided hundreds of climbers, but he had never encountered a couple who had fabricated their entire climbing history. Robert worked in insurance. Sarah worked in marketing. Neither had ever climbed a mountain higher than 14,000 feet. Their Kilimanjaro summit, they had paid guides to carry them most of the way and had summited for approximately 8 minutes before descending. Their Denali summit, they had hired a private guide and had turned around at 17,000 feet, but had submitted false summit photos to the expedition company. Their Aconcagua summit, they had faked the entire climb, paying someone else to summit and submitting their photos. They had been frauds their entire climbing careers, but Annapurna didn't know that. Annapurna would learn soon enough. They arrived at base camp on April 20s with confidence that bordered on delusional. They told other climbers they were seasoned mountaineers. They told Pemba they had summited higher peaks without issue. Pemba had no reason to doubt them. By Camp 1, Pemba noticed that Robert was moving poorly. His breathing was labored. His movements were uncoordinated. But Robert explained this away by saying he had been sick recently and was just catching up. Sarah was moving better, but her oxygen saturation at rest was 68%, concerning. Pemba recommended slowing the pace. Robert said they were experienced and would be fine. Do you understand what was about to happen? 2 liars, 1 mountain, 1 guide about to pay the price for trusting their lies. By Camp 2 on May 10th, both Robert and Sarah were showing severe signs of altitude sickness. Their oxygen saturations were 62 and 64% respectively. Robert had a severe headache and was vomiting. Sarah was experiencing confusion and disorientation. Pemba recognized the signs. They were both developing high-altitude cerebral edema. He told them they needed to descend immediately. Robert said they just needed rest. Sarah said the symptoms would pass. Pemba said, haste doesn't pass without descent. He said they were both showing critical signs and needed to go down now. Robert told Pemba he was being overly cautious. Sarah said they had paid good money and weren't turning back. Pemba made a decision. He told them they were descending whether they agreed or not. At 2 p.m. on May 10th, Pemba began physically supporting both Robert and Sarah as they descended from Camp 2. Robert was barely conscious. Sarah was hallucinating. They moved slowly. By 6 p.m., they were only halfway to Camp 1. The sun was setting, temperature was dropping. Pemba realized they wouldn't make Camp 1 before dark. He found a protected rock outcrop and established an emergency shelter. They huddled together as temperatures dropped to -30 degrees Celsius. During the night, Robert's condition deteriorated. His breathing became irregular. His body temperature was dropping. By 3 a.m. on May 11th, Robert stopped responding to stimuli. Sarah was still conscious but confused. She kept asking where they were. She kept asking why Robert wasn't moving. At 6:15 a.m. on May 11th, Robert's breathing stopped. He was dead from a combination of haze, pulmonary edema, and hypothermia. But this is where the story gets darker. Sarah, grief-stricken and disoriented, refused to descend. She said she wanted to stay with Robert. She said she wouldn't leave him alone. Pemba tried to convince her to move. Sarah refused. She said she would rather die on the mountain with her husband than live without him. Pemba had no choice. He physically had to drag Sarah away from Robert's body. Sarah screamed and fought him. At approximately 7 a.m. on May 11th, Pemba got Sarah moving downward. They descended slowly through the morning. By noon, they were at approximately 20,000 feet. Sarah's condition was worsening. Her confusion was increasing. Her body was breaking down from the combination of severe haze and psychological trauma. At 1:30 p.m. on May 11th, Sarah collapsed and would not move anymore. Pemba tried to help her up. She was too heavy. He tried calling for rescue on his radio. The signal was weak. He waited for approximately 30 minutes, hoping another expedition team would pass. Nobody came. At 2:15 p.m. on May 11th, Sarah's breathing stopped. She was dead from haze and pulmonary edema. Her body remained on the mountain at approximately 19,800 feet. Pemba descended alone through the afternoon. He reached Camp 1 at 5 p.m. on May 11th. He was traumatized. He had lost both his clients in a matter of 12 hours. The investigation that followed revealed everything: the fabricated resumes, the fake summits, the lies Robert and Sarah had told to book an expedition on Annapurna. They had died because they had lied about who they were. But Pemba survived with the guilt of having trusted them. But here's what makes this story even more disturbing. While Robert and Sarah were dying on Annapurna because of their fraudulent experience claims, another fraudster was preparing to attempt an even more dangerous mountain. A woman who had claimed credentials she didn't possess. A woman who had submitted false summits and fake photographs. A woman who was about to teach the same lesson that Annapurna had just taught Robert and Sarah. Mountains don't care about your lies. Denali was waiting. It was July 3, 2013, at approximately 10,000 feet on Mount Denali in Alaska. Victoria Chen, 42, was a former investment banker from San Francisco. She had told her expedition operator that she had summited Kilimanjaro, Elbrus, Aconcagua, and Everest. She had submitted photographs of herself at summits. Every photo was real, but they weren't her summits. She had purchased photos from online climbers who had summited and had photoshopped herself into them. The Everest photo showed her face edited onto another climber's body. Nobody had noticed. Her guide was Tenzin Sherpa, 33, with 12 years of guiding experience on Alaska mountains. Tenzin didn't suspect anything. Why would he? Climbers submitted credentials for a reason. By 14,000 feet on Denali, Tenzin noticed that Victoria was moving poorly. Her breathing was extremely labored. Her movements were uncoordinated. Tenzin checked her oxygen saturation at rest. It was 70%, dangerously low for that altitude. Tenzin recommended turning around immediately. Victoria said she had paid $8,000 for this expedition and was going to summit. Tenzin said money didn't matter if she was dead. Victoria said she felt fine and would continue. Tenzin documented his concerns. By 16,000 feet, Victoria was vomiting continuously. She was experiencing severe headache and confusion. Tenzin recognized high-altitude cerebral edema developing. He told Victoria they were descending now. Victoria refused. She said she had claimed the Everest summit publicly and needed to summit Denali to justify that claim. This was the moment Tenzin realized the truth. Victoria was a fraud. She had fabricated her credentials and was now desperate to summit Denali to validate her lies. Do you see the pattern? A fraudster, a guide, a mountain that only cares about truth. At 2 p.m. on July 3rd, Tenzin physically started supporting Victoria's descent. She was barely conscious. By 5 p.m., they were at approximately 15,000 feet. Victoria had stopped responding to commands. Her body was in complete system failure. At 5:45 p.m., on a section of steep terrain covered in ice, Victoria's foot slipped. She fell approximately 30 meters down a steep slope. The impact injuries were catastrophic. She was unconscious immediately. She was dead within minutes from head trauma and internal injuries. Tenzin descended alone and reached base camp by 8 p.m. on July 3rd. The investigation revealed Victoria's fabricated credentials. She had died because she was trying to cover up her lies. She had died trying to summit Denali so nobody would question her fake Everest summit. She had died because she couldn't accept the consequence of her fraud, that she actually wasn't an experienced climber. I'm Isaac from the Mountain Takes. Robert and Sarah Hartman died on Annapurna because they lied about their experience. Victoria Chen died on Denali for the exact same reason. 2 different mountains, 2 different guides, 2 different years. Same lesson. Mountains don't care about your credentials. Mountains only care about what your body can do. The guides survived. The fraudsters died. And somewhere on Annapurna, Robert's body still remains where Pemba had to leave him. A permanent reminder of what happens when you bring lies to mountains. Bartek Zimski was born in 1995 inches southern Poland, near the Silesian Beskids. The mountains there are modest by global standards, nothing like the Himalayas, but they were steep enough to teach a young boy that mountains demanded respect. By age 6, Ziemski could ski. By age 16, he was climbing seriously. He studied software engineering in Warsaw, then moved to Salzburg, near the Alps, where the mountains were significantly larger. He joined Poland's national climbing program. By his 20s, he had summited peaks most climbers only read about. But here's what makes Zimski different. He hated attention. While other climbers were building Instagram followings, Zimski was unemployed and living in a van. While other climbers were seeking sponsorships, Ziemski was working part-time software jobs to fund his own expeditions. When Outside magazine interviewed him at Everest Base Camp in May 2026, they asked him the basic question, why climb? Zimski answered in one sentence. He said, "I'm not a mountaineer at all. I just do it for fun." That statement contains everything you need to understand about what's about to happen on this mountain. But here's where the story gets insane. In 2022, Ziemski decided he would do something that had never been done before. He called it the Mad Ski Project. The concept was simple in theory and almost impossible in execution. Climb and ski down all 14 of the world's 8 peaks without supplemental oxygen, without Sherpas, without any support team. He would carry his own gear, cook his own food, set his own tent, and when he reached each summit, he would strap skis to his feet and descend the mountain. Think about that for a second. Skiing requires constant rapid decisions, where to turn, how hard to edge, when to commit, when to bail. In the death zone above 26,000 feet, where your brain is operating at maybe 40% capacity, every decision becomes slower and more dangerous. Add zero supplemental oxygen on top of that, and the margin for error approaches zero. A fall on skis at that altitude is almost always fatal. Most people who have attempted full ski descents of 8, many of them died trying. Zimski decided to do it 9 times in 5 years. The project started in summer 2022, Inches, Pakistan. He went after 2 mountains back to back, Broad Peak and Gasherbrum II. Both summits, both ski descents, both without oxygen. For someone who had just started this insane project, it was an aggressive opening move. The climbing community barely noticed. No press releases, no social media blitz, just a Polish guy descending mountains. Nobody else was trying to ski. And then he moved to Nepal. This is where things escalated. What happened next changed everything, not just for Zimski, but for understanding what the human body can actually accomplish at extreme altitude. In spring 2023, Zimski summited Annapurna without oxygen and skied down. Annapurna is statistically one of the 3 deadliest mountains on Earth, the kind of peak that kills experienced climbers regularly. Then he moved to Dhaulagiri and made the first complete ski descent of that mountain in history. But here's the moment that reveals Zimski's actual character. While he and his climbing partner Oswald Pereira were resting in Kathmandu after skiing Dhaulagiri, a distress call came through. An 84-year-old Spanish climber named Carlos Soria, one of the most respected high-altitude mountaineers alive, had broken his leg at 7,700 meters on the same mountain Zimski had just skied down. Zimski and Pereira got back on a helicopter immediately. They were dropped at Camp 2. They picked up oxygen and medicine and a sliding stretcher. They climbed up to Camp 3, found Soria in his tent, and spent the entire night helping bring him down through the dark. They stayed with him until a helicopter could extract him in the morning. While other climbers were celebrating records, Zimski was risking his life to save someone he didn't know. That's the kind of person we're talking about here. By 2024, Zimski had done Makalu and Kangchenjunga, another first complete ski descent in history. By 2025, he had done Manaslu, the same mountain where world-class ski mountaineer Hilary Nelson had died just 3 years earlier, killed by an avalanche during her descent. Zimski skied the same mountain successfully. By the time 2026 arrived, he had 9 mountains checked off. 5 remained, 2 inches Tibet that were closed to foreign climbers, and 3 inches Pakistan, Gasherbrum, Ainanga Parbat, and K2. If he finished all 5, he would become the first person in history to ski all 14. But first, he had to get through spring 2026. This is where the story enters completely new territory, because what happened on Everest in May 2026 had never been attempted before by anyone. Zimski arrived in Nepal in early April 2026. While most climbers flew directly to Everest Base Camp, Zimski took a different route. He went to Mera Peak first and used it to acclimatize on his own terms. By the time he reached Everest Base Camp, his body was already adapted to high altitude. He was ready to move, and then the mountain closed. A massive serac collapse blocked the Khumbu icefall for 3 weeks. Hundreds of climbers were stuck at base camp, watching weather forecasts and waiting. Acclimatization rotations couldn't happen. The summit window in May kept advancing with every wasted day. For most climbers, this delay was just frustrating. For Zimski, it was a problem with a deadline. Here's where you realize why Zimski is different from every other climber on that mountain. He didn't wait for permission. He linked up with a small group of Sherpas from different expeditions. Together, they found their own route through the Khumbu icefall, while the official route was still closed. By the time authorities opened the main route on the 28th of April, Zimski was already at Camp 1, days ahead of the competition. But wait, because what he did next was absolutely unprecedented. Most climbers would take weeks to acclimate properly. Zimski took 1 rest day after his rotation. Then he started his Lhotse push. Lhotse, the 4th highest mountain on Earth. Day 1, he climbed from base camp all the way up to Camp 3, nearly 1,800 meters of vertical gain in a single day without oxygen. Most climbers would need 3 days for that. Day 2, he moved from Camp 3 to Camp 4 on the Lhotse face and rested briefly. Day 3, he left Camp 4 in the dark and headed for the summit with no oxygen, no Sherpa, and no fixed ropes, because the rope fixing teams hadn't finished yet. Zimski broke trail himself on the upper section of Lhotse. He summited on May 12, 2026, at approximately 8:15 a.m. He was the first person to reach the top of Lhotse that season. And then he did something that had literally never been done before in the history of mountaineering. He strapped skis to his feet at 27,940 meters and descended 1600 meters through the Lhotse couloir, a narrow chute of ice and snow angled between 40 and 50 degrees. He skied down the Lhotse face. He crossed the Upper Western CWM. He navigated through the Khumbu icefall. From summit to base camp with no breaks, no rest sections, no skipping terrain. He became the first person in history to complete a ski descent of Lhotse. Most climbers would have needed weeks to recover from that. A no-oxygen summit on the fourth highest mountain is a catastrophic physical hit to your body. Zimski rested for 7 days, and then he did it again, but this time on Everest. This is where the story becomes almost impossible to believe, but every detail is documented. On May 19, 2026, just before midnight at Camp 4, Zimski started his Everest summit push. By this point, the mountain was crowded, hundreds of climbers moving simultaneously on the same route, fighting for the same weather window. The clean lines that had been available on Lhotse were completely gone. Zimski had to navigate around hundreds of other climbers ascending fixed ropes. He summited Everest at 9:30 a.m. on May 20. He asked a nearby climber to take his summit photo, and then he did what only one other person in history had ever done. He skied down from the summit to base camp without supplemental oxygen. But here's what makes Zimski's descent different from everyone else's. He did it completely alone, completely self-supported, with no team waiting at camps, no Sherpas breaking trail, no support structure. The descent took 5 hours. He skied 3,485 vertical meters from the summit back to base camp. He had to navigate around other climbers still ascending. He had to find lines through terrain that wasn't designed to be skied. He had to ski sections of the Khumbu icefall that he had already skied down just 1 week earlier on Lhotse. He reached base camp at 2:50 p.m. on May 20, 2026. He had just become only the second person in history to ski from the summit of Everest to base camp without supplemental oxygen. More importantly, he was the first person to ever do it completely self-supported with no team. No one in mountaineering history had ever skied both Lhotse and Everest in the same season. But here's the thing that makes this even more remarkable. While Bartek Zimski was quietly breaking records that would be studied for decades, almost nobody noticed. The 2026 Everest season will be remembered for a dozen other records: most permits ever issued, most summits in a single day, most revenue collected by Nepal, strictest rule set in history, hundreds of news articles, thousands of Instagram posts. But the biggest physical feat of the 2026 season belonged to the climber who least seemed to care about being noticed for it. Compare this to what happened 8 months earlier when another Polish climber, Andrzej Bargiel, became the first person ever to ski Everest without oxygen. Bargiel's descent was sponsored by Red Bull. He had Sherpas fixing the route ahead of him. He had a full support team. The expedition was professionally organized and heavily documented. When Bargiel reached the summit in September 2025, it became a massive media event. The Polish Prime Minister posted about it. Red Bull released a polished film. Bargiel went on a press tour. Zimski's descent 8 months later was the exact same achievement, becoming only the second person to ski Everest without oxygen, done in a completely different way, completely unsupported, completely undocumented, completely unnoticed by the world. By the end of the 2026 spring season, he has 5 mountains remaining. 2 are in Tibet, Cho Oyu and Shisha Pangma, but both are closed to foreign climbers in 2026 due to Chinese government restrictions. That part of the project is stuck indefinitely. The other 3 are in Pakistan in the Karakoram Range, Gasherbrum, I Nanga Parbat, and K2. K2 is the only one that has ever been skied before, and Andrzej Bargiel did it in 2018 with a full team and perfect condition. If Zimski finishes all 5 remaining mountains, No one else has even attempted it. No one else has even considered it possible. I'm Isaac from the Mountain Takes. Bartek Zimski lives in a van. He has no sponsors. He has no team. He has no social media following. He just decided to do something that nobody else on Earth has done, and he did it alone. While the world was watching hundreds of climbers fight for summit spots, one man was quietly rewriting the rules of what's possible on mountains. If you've ever wondered what separation looks like between chasing records and actually breaking them, between climbing for attention and climbing for yourself, subscribe, because there are more stories of mountains that belong to the people who least care about being famous. I'll see you on the next descent. The story begins in the corporate boardrooms of Innsbruck, Austria, where a 52-year-old man named Werner Steinbach spent his days managing high-stakes corporate restructuring. He was a man used to getting exactly what he wanted through sheer aggression, heavy litigation, and the absolute power of his bank account. To him, every contract was negotiable, and every rule was just a suggestion for lesser people to follow. For decades, Werner had built a massive financial portfolio, but as he entered his 50s, a dark obsession began to consume him. He didn't just want to be wealthy, he wanted the ultimate status symbol that money could buy. He wanted to stand on the summit of Mount Everest. The problem was that his body was already a ticking time bomb. During a routine corporate health checkup, doctors discovered that Werner was suffering from advanced coronary artery disease, a severe medical condition where the blood vessels supplying his heart were heavily blocked and narrowed. The medical advice was absolute and clear. Stepping into high altitudes would trigger a fatal cardiovascular failure. But instead of accepting reality, Werner's corporate ego went into overdrive. He believed that human biology could be managed just like a failing business corporation. He refused to let a medical diagnosis ruin his travel plans. Using his massive financial resources, he contacted a corrupt medical professional who was willing to sign off on any document for the right price. For a heavy fee, Werner secured a completely clean, fabricated medical clearance certificate that falsely stated his heart was in perfect athletic condition. He then approached an elite expedition agency in Nepal, flashing his high-end bank statements and his forged medical clearance to secure a premium spot on the mountain for the May 2021 climbing season. If you think that entitlement and corporate greed have no place in the wild corners of the world, and if you think the stories of the guides who pay the price for someone else's choices deserve to be told, hit that subscribe button. Leave your thoughts about this corporate fraud in the comments below. He bought the most expensive gear, demanded the highest level of personal service, and flew to Kathmandu with the absolute certainty that his wealth made him completely invincible. When he arrived at Everest Base Camp in April 2021, Werner immediately established himself as the most hated client on the most Glacier. He treated the local mountain staff and his assigned guides not as survival experts, but as low-wage corporate servants who existed only to execute his orders. He would openly humiliate the kitchen staff if his meals weren't served precisely on time, and he constantly bragged about his high-powered legal connections in Europe and Kathmandu. His primary assigned guide was Ngawang Tendi, a 31-year-old elite high-altitude mountaineer who had survived a terrifying 70-foot crevasse fall in 2018. Ngawang was a legendary professional who had already guided clients to the summits of Everest, K2O, and Annapurna. For Ngawang, this specific climbing season was the most critical moment of his life. He was working obsessively to fund the construction of a small 3-room trekking lodge with his wife in Namche Bazaar, a project costing $18,000 that would finally secure his famille Yai's long-term financial independence so he could retire from the deadly, high-altitude trade. The silent conflict between the elite guide and the entitled client began to escalate during the mandatory acclimatization rotations to the higher camps. Ngawang was a deeply methodical professional, and he noticed that Werner's body was reacting abnormally to the altitude. While other climbers adjusted slowly, Werner was constantly gasping for air, his skin turning a sickly gray color even during simple resting periods. During a night at Camp 2, where the temperature sat at a freezing -12 degrees Fahrenheit, Ngawang walked into Werner's tent, unannounced to check on his well-being. He caught Werner in the dark, desperately swallowing heavy doses of an unprescribed vasodilator, a powerful medical drug designed to artificially widen blood vessels and force blood through blocked arteries. And Jaewang immediately confiscated the medication, knowing that using such high-risk drugs at extreme altitude without medical supervision could cause sudden, catastrophic blood pressure drops and fatal internal clotting. When Ngawang brought the illegal medication to the expedition doctor and suggested that Werner should be immediately disqualified and sent down the mountain for his own safety, the corporate consultant erupted into a state of pure legal fury. Werner didn't argue about his health. Instead, he used the only weapon he knew how to wield: intimidation. He screamed loudly across the camp, stating, "I paid for a summit attempt, not a medical evaluation." He threatened the expedition agency with a massive multi-million-dollar breach of contract lawsuit that would completely bankrupt their entire operation, utilizing his powerful corporate legal connections in Kathmandu to silence the management. The agency owners, terrified of a high-profile international lawsuit and desperate to protect their relationship with a wealthy client, made a fatal decision. They dismissed the doctor's warnings, overrode Ngawang's professional concerns, and told the guide to mind his own logistics and let the client manage his own physical pacing. The system completely collapsed to avoid litigation, leaving Ngawang alone in the high altitudes with a man whose heart was actively failing. Ngawang quietly accepted the situation, realizing he had no institutional support. He stopped making entries in the official logbook, knowing that the corporate machinery had already decided to push Werner upward regardless of the cost. He focused entirely on trying to keep the man alive. On the night of May 21st, 2021, the final summit push began from Camp 4 at 26,000 feet. The weather on the South Col was a frozen wasteland, swept by 50-knot winds that made the ambient temperature feel twice as cold. The tents were flapping like machine guns, the fabric snapping so loudly that conversation was completely impossible without shouting directly into someone's ear. As they moved up into the dead zone, Werner's physical deception began to catch up with him at an alarming rate. His circulatory system was shutting down, and to compensate for his failing heart, he began consuming double his allocated oxygen flow rate, draining the survival cylinders that were meant to act as his safety margin for the descent. Ngawang watched the pressure gauges drop with a feeling of absolute dread, but every time he tried to slow Werner down, the consultant would simply point his gloved finger upward and push forward. By 11 a.m. on May 22nd, the route near the high ridge of the South Summit was choked with an enormous bottleneck of flashing headlamps and strained breathing. The temperature had plummeted to a brutal -34 degrees, and the wind chill factor was capable of freezing exposed human skin in less than 60 seconds. The ice underneath their steel crampons was hard as concrete, a dull, featureless blue that offered zero room for a single misstep. The human traffic jam near the Hillary Step was 3 hours long, forcing climbers to stand completely still in the killing cold, draining their precious oxygen supplies while waiting for the line to move. That long delay was the exact moment the medical fraud finally caught up with Werner Steinbach. At 28,700 feet, right in the middle of the crowded fixed line, Werner suffered a massive, catastrophic cardiac event. The severe blockage in his coronary arteries, combined with the extreme hypoxia and intense physical exertion, caused his heart muscle to completely seize. He didn't slip and he didn't fall. He simply collapsed directly onto the safety rope, his body instantly going limp. He blocked the entire vertical route, trapping dozens of climbers behind him who were running dangerously low on oxygen. Ngawang Tendi immediately sprung into action, dropping to his knees on the narrow, exposed icy ridge to perform chest compressions in the howling, sub-zero wind, while other desperate climbers literally had to scramble and step over their bodies just to survive. Ngawang spent 2 agonizing hours trying to revive his client, refusing to give up even when it became completely obvious obvious that Werner was dead. Werner's face turned a deep, hypoxic purple, his eyes staring blankly into the cold sky while his expensive plastic boots dangled uselessly over the thousands of feet of the Kangshung face. The mountain had finished its calculation, but the true tragedy of Werner's corporate arrogance was inherited entirely by his guide, because Ngawang had spent 2 hours in the extreme cold without moving, performing chest compressions without his outer mittens to manipulate the medical equipment. He suffered severe, irreversible frostbite on his fingers and toes. The prolonged exposure in the dead zone destroyed the tissue in his extremities completely. When the rescue teams finally managed to secure Werner's frozen remains to a permanent anchor point on the rope, Wang had to be dragged down the mountain, his hands and feet completely frozen solid. The aftermath of Werner Steinbach's legal fraud was absolute devastation for the people left behind. The wealthy consultant died on the rope, leaving his family to manage the fallout of his extreme delusion. But for Ngawang Tendi, the cost was permanent. He required multiple surgical amputations in Kathmandu, losing 3 fingers on his right hand and several toes, effectively ending his career as an elite high-altitude guide at the young age of 31. The grand dream of building the 3-room trekking lodge in Namche Bazaar to secure his family's independence was instantly shattered, as the half-built structure had to be sold to a corporate competitor for a fraction of its value just to pay for Ngawang's massive medical bills. The corporate consultant thought he could bully the mountain with lawsuits and paperwork, but in the end, the mountain only took the life of the fraud and completely ruined the future of the innocent professional who was forced to carry the weight of his arrogance. I'm Isaac from The Mountain Takes, and I will see you on the next descent. It was the 8th of July 2023 at approximately 7,200 meters on K2's bottleneck section in Pakistan. K2 is the second highest mountain on Earth at 8,611 meters. It is also the second deadliest. For every 4 climbers who summit K2, 1 dies. The bottleneck is a narrow gully where massive seracs hang suspended above the route. Climbers must pass through it quickly, knowing that falling ice could kill them at any moment. On the 8th of July 2023, a climber named Melissa Ramirez, age 46, was ascending through the bottleneck with her guide. Melissa was a venture capitalist from Austin, Texas. She had summited Kilimanjaro and Denali. She believed that experience on lower mountains translated to experience on K2. She was categorically wrong. Melissa Ramirez had arrived at K2 base camp on the 20th of June 2023 with an attitude that immediately created friction. She was wealthy. She was successful in business. She was accustomed to getting what she wanted through determination and resource allocation. She had paid $145,000 for her K2 expedition through a premium operator. She had hired a Sherpa guide named Dorji who had summited K2 6 times. Dorje was experienced, skilled, and respected in the climbing community. Melissa treated him like an employee who worked on commission, which meant she believed that his job was to get her to the summit, regardless of conditions or safety protocols. By Camp 3, at 7,400 meters, Melissa's behavior had already created problems. She was pushing ahead of the acclimatization schedule. She was ignoring Dorje's recommendations about rest days. She was insisting that they climb higher faster than safe protocols allowed. Dorje had documented in his logbook that he had recommended slowing the pace. Melissa had responded by questioning whether he actually wanted her to summit, implying that his caution was somehow a failure on his part. On the 8th of July, Melissa and Dorje began their push toward the summit. The weather was forecasted to hold for approximately 18 hours. Melissa was moving through the bottleneck at approximately 7,200 meters when her oxygen saturation was measured at 46%, critically low. Dorji recommended using supplemental oxygen immediately. Melissa said she wanted to conserve oxygen for higher altitude. Dorje explained explained that if her oxygen saturation was already critically low, conserving oxygen meant dying. Melissa told him that she had paid him to guide, not to lecture. At 9:30 a.m. on the 8th of July, Melissa was at approximately 7,500 meters on the bottleneck. Her movements were becoming uncoordinated. Her judgment was visibly compromised. Dorji was supporting her physically, essentially carrying her upward. A serac above them was making ominous creaking sounds. The ice was unstable. The conditions were worsening. Dorja made a command decision. He told Melissa they were descending immediately. Melissa refused. She said they were too close to the summit to turn back. She said she would not pay the remaining balance of her expedition fee if they descended without summiting. Dorja attempted to force her to descend. Melissa physically resisted. She was hysterical, screaming that she had come this far, that she had paid too much, that she would not turn back. Her brain, starved of oxygen at 7,500 meters, was no longer capable of rational thought. But her determination was absolute. She pushed Dorje away. She began climbing higher alone. Dorje attempted to follow her. He was moving faster, trying to catch her, trying to physically stop her, but the terrain was steep and exposed. At approximately 10:15 a.m., on a section of the bottleneck covered in mixed rock and ice, Melissa's foot slipped. She fell backward. She impacted the rock, face approximately 20 meters below her starting point. The impact injuries were severe. Dorje descended as fast as he could, reaching her in approximately 5 minutes. Melissa was unconscious. She was not breathing. Her skull had fractured. There was nothing Dorje could do. At 10:47 a.m. on the 8th of July 2023, at 7,300 meters on K2's bottleneck, Melissa Ramirez died. She had ignored her guide's warnings 4 times in the final 2 hours of her life. Dorje descended alone, traumatized. In interviews afterward, he said, "I told her we had to go down. She said she was paying for a summit. I told her the ice was unstable. She said I was being fearful. I told her oxygen was critical. She said I was trying to sabotage her. At some point, I realized I was trying to save someone who didn't want to be saved. The mountain doesn't negotiate with egos." It was May 14, 2023, at approximately 6:45 a.m. at Camp 3 on Mount Annapurna's north face in Nepal. The altitude was 7,500 meters. The temperature was minus 35 degrees Celsius. A climber named Christine Aldridge, age 51, was preparing for her summit push. Christine was a social media influencer from Los Angeles with 612,000 Instagram followers. She had built her brand around wellness, fitness, and motivational content. She had posted repeatedly about her Annapurna attempt, telling her followers that she was going to summit and inspire millions. She had sponsored gear companies who had provided equipment in exchange for social media promotion. She had made commitments to her followers that she would summit. Christine had arrived at Annapurna Base Camp on the 20th of April 2023 with a photographer, a videographer, and a content team. Her expedition was not primarily about climbing the mountain. It was about documenting her climb for social media. Every camp was photographed. Every moment of struggle was filmed for authenticity. Every rest break was captioned with motivational quotes. Her guide, a Sherpa named Pemba, with 20 years of Annapurna experience, had attempted to establish basic safety protocols. Christine had rejected them. She said that authentic content required real struggle, real difficulty, real documentation. Safety protocols, in her view, would make the content look staged. By Camp 2, Christine's oxygen saturation was already compromised at 62%. Pemba had recommended she descend and attempt Annapurna in a future year. Christine had responded by filming his recommendation and then posting it to her Instagram stories with the caption, "Even my guide thinks I'm too strong for this mountain. Fitness no limits, Annapurna will not stone." Pemba had been horrified. He understood that her post was not just documenting her attempt, it was committing her publicly to continuing, regardless of safety. Turning back now would look like failure to her 612,000 followers. On May 14, Christine and Pemba began their summit push from Camp 3. Christine's oxygen saturation was 58%. Her breathing was labored. Her movements were slow. Pemba suggested using supplemental oxygen immediately. Christine said she wanted to earn her summit without oxygen. It would be more authentic for her followers. Pemba explained that authenticity meant nothing if she was dead. Christine filmed his explanation and posted it to Instagram with commentary about how guides try to limit us with fear. By 10 a.m. on May 14, Christine was at approximately 8,000 meters. Her oxygen saturation had dropped to 44%. Her brain was being destroyed by the altitude. Her judgment was completely compromised. She was hallucinating, seeing things that weren't there, hearing voices that didn't exist. Pemba was supporting her, essentially dragging her upward, because turning back now would mean admitting failure to her followers. Christine's desperation to summit was no longer about mountaineering. It was about maintaining her brand. At 11:30 a.m., Christine collapsed on the mountain at approximately 8,050 meters. Her body could no longer function. Her oxygen saturation was 38%. Her brain was swelling from cerebral edema. Her lungs were filling with fluid from pulmonary edema. Pemba attempted to administer supplemental oxygen and to lower her toward Camp 3. But Christine's weight, combined with her complete incapacity and the exposed terrain, made descent nearly impossible for one person. Pemba called for assistance via radio. Other guides and climbers nearby responded. A rescue effort began, but at 8,000 meters in deteriorating weather conditions, rescue is almost impossible. By 2 p.m. on May 14, Christine's breathing had stopped. Her heart had stopped. Her body had simply failed under the impossible conditions of extreme altitude, combined with severe hypoxia and cerebral edema. At 2:47 p.m. on May 14, 2023, at 8,050 meters on Mount Annapurna's north face, Christine Aldridge died. Pemba descended alone. He did not work as a guide for the remainder of 2023. In a statement to the expedition operator, he wrote, "I told her 5 times we needed to descend. She said her followers were watching. I told her oxygen was critical. She said she wanted to earn her summit. I told her she would die. She said that was authentic. The mountain does not care about authenticity or followers. It only cares about oxygen saturation. When oxygen fails, everything else fails with it." Christine's Instagram account remained active after her death. Her followers posted thousands of comments, some mourning her, some claiming she had died doing what she loved, some using her death as content for their own posts. Her final Instagram story, posted at 11:47 a.m. on May 14, showed her at high altitude with the caption, "The mountain is trying to stop me, but I'm stronger than fear. Nothing can stop." The post was made approximately 17 minutes before she lost consciousness.
Wow.